The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Westfield Academy as students hurried across the campus courtyard. Among them, a young woman walked slowly, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder and her eyes taking in everything around her. This was Elena Rodriguez, though nobody here knew her real story, yet Elena pushed open the heavy doors of the music building, the familiar scent of polished wood and old sheet music filling her nostrils. She had missed this smell, but for very different reasons than anyone might guess. The hallway buzzed with the usual morning energy of college students. Grabbing coffee and chatting about weekend plans, she found room 214 and hesitated outside the door. Through the small window, she could see other students already seated at the piano benches, some stretching their fingers, others flipping through music books. Taking a deep breath, Elena reminded herself why she was here. This was her chance for something she had never experienced before, being ordinary. "You must be the new student," said Professor Williams as she entered. He was a kind-looking man, in his 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Welcome to our intermediate piano class. Please find a seat anywhere you like." Elena chose a bench in the middle row, not too close to draw attention, not too far back to seem disinterested. The other students glanced at her briefly before returning to their conversations. She pulled out a simple notebook and pen, the kind any regular student might use. "So, tell us about your musical background," Professor Williams said, settling into his chair at the front of the room. "Have you played piano before?" Elena's heart raced. This was the moment she had practiced in her mind dozens of times. "I've had some lessons," she said quietly, making her voice sound uncertain. "Nothing too serious. Just basic stuff, you know." The professor nodded encouragingly. "That's perfectly fine. Many students come here with different levels of experience. What made you want to take this class?" "I thought it might be fun," Elena replied, choosing her words carefully. "I always liked music, but I never really had time to focus on it properly." The irony of her statement almost made her smile. She had done nothing but focus on music for most of her life. As the class continued, Professor Williams demonstrated some basic techniques. Elena watched her classmates struggle with simple exercises that she could have played perfectly when she was 7 years old. One student, a cheerful girl named Amy, was having trouble with a basic scale. "Like this?" Amy asked, her fingers fumbling over the keys. "Almost," the professor said patiently. "Remember to curve your fingers and keep your wrists relaxed." Elena wanted to help, wanted to show Amy the proper finger position and breathing technique that would make everything flow naturally. But she held back, reminding herself that an intermediate student wouldn't know such advanced concepts. When it was Elena's turn to play, she approached the piano with nervous steps that weren't entirely fake. She was nervous, but not about playing. She was nervous about playing badly on purpose. Her fingers found the keys and she began a simple scale. She deliberately made her movements slightly stiff, added a few minor stumbles, and kept her expression concentrated in the way someone learning might look. "Good start," Professor Williams said. "I can see you have some natural ability. With practice you'll improve quickly." Elena nodded gratefully, though inside she felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. The other students seemed to accept her as one of them, someone trying her best to learn something new. During the break, Amy approached her. "Don't worry about being new," she said kindly. "Professor Williams is really patient. I've been taking lessons for 2 years and I still mess up all the time." "Thanks," Elena said, genuinely touched by the girl's kindness. "It's nice to know I'm not the only one who finds this challenging." As the weeks passed, Elena settled into her new routine. She would sit in the back of the practice rooms during off hours, deliberately playing simple pieces with careful imperfection. Sometimes other students would practice nearby, and she would listen to their genuine struggles with pieces she had mastered as a child. One afternoon, she overheard 2 students talking about their upcoming performance assignments. "I'm so nervous." One said, "What if I mess up in front of everyone?" "At least you're not starting from scratch like that new girl Elena," the other replied. "She's brave for even trying." I remember when I was at her level, it was terrifying. Elena felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. These students saw her as brave for attempting something they thought was difficult for her. But the real bravery, she realized, was in choosing to be here at all, choosing to pretend to be ordinary when everything in her past had taught her she was anything. But her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How are your studies going, Mia? Are you eating enough?" Elena smiled. Her mother was one of the few people who knew where she really was, and she worried constantly about her daughter's decision to step away from her musical career. "Everything's fine, Mom," Elena texted back. "I'm learning a lot." It wasn't a lie. She was learning about friendship, about being patient with herself, about what it felt like to be treated as an equal rather than as a prodigy. She was learning about the joy of helping others without being asked to perform miracles in class. She watched Professor Williams work with each student individually, offering encouragement and gentle correction. She found herself studying his teaching methods, fascinated by how he could break down complex concepts into simple, understandable pieces. This was something she had never experienced, learning about teaching itself. "Elena, would you like to try this piece?" Professor Williams asked one day, handing her a sheet of music. It was a simple melody, something a first-year student might play. She looked at the notes, seeing immediately how the piece was constructed, where the natural breathing points were, how the harmony supported the melody. But she approached it, as Elena, the intermediate student, would, playing slowly and carefully as if she were reading the notes for the first time. "Very nice," the professor said. "You're developing good sight-reading skills. Keep practicing and you'll be ready for more challenging pieces soon." Elena nodded, though she wondered what he might think if he knew she had sight-read Rachmaninoff concertos when she was 12. The thought made her feel both proud and sad. Proud of what she had accomplished, but sad for the childhood she had traded away for those accomplishments. As she packed up her things after class, Elena caught her reflection in the window. She looked different now, more relaxed, less burdened. The constant tension she had carried for years was beginning to fade. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worried about disappointing anyone with her performance. She wasn't trying to live up to impossible expectations. She was just Elena, a student trying to learn piano, making friends, and discovering what it meant to be ordinary. And for now, that was exactly who she wanted to be. The autumn leaves were falling outside the music building windows as Elena walked into class that Tuesday morning. She had been at Westfield Academy for almost 2 months now, and she was finally starting to feel like she belonged. Her classmates greeted her with warm smiles, and she had even started joining them for coffee after class sometimes. Professor Williams stood at the front of the room with a stack of papers in his hands, looking more serious than usual. Elena noticed the way he kept glancing at his watch and shuffling through the sheets. Something was different about today. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "I hope you're all ready for an important announcement. As you know, we're approaching the end of the semester, and it's time to discuss your final performance project." Elena felt her stomach tighten slightly. She had been dreading this moment, knowing it would come eventually. Final performances meant being judged, being evaluated, being put in the spotlight, all the things she had come here to escape. "Each of you will be performing a solo piece that challenges your current skill level," Professor Williams continued. "This isn't just about playing something you already know perfectly. I want to see growth, effort, and willingness to push beyond your comfort zone." Amy raised her hand nervously. "How do we choose what to play?" "I'll be assigning each piece personally," the professor replied. "I've been watching all of you carefully these past months, and I have a good sense of what will challenge each of you appropriately." Elena's hands grew cold. She had worked so hard to maintain her cover as an intermediate student. But what if he gave her something too easy? What if other students noticed she could play it without any struggle? Or worse, what if he somehow sensed she was more advanced than she pretended to be? Professor Williams began calling names and handing out sheet music. Elena watched as her classmates received their assignments. Amy got a gentle piece by Mozart that would help her work on her timing. Kevin, who had been struggling with finger independence, received an exercise-focused composition that would strengthen his technique. Elena Rodriguez, Professor Williams called. She stood up on shaky legs and walked to the front of the room. The professor looked at her thoughtfully for a moment before reaching into his stack of papers. "For you, I've chosen Chopin's Minute. Waltz," he said, handing her the sheet music. Elena's heart stopped. She heard several of her classmates gasp behind her. She looked down at the familiar notes on the page, music she had performed countless times in concert halls around the world. This was the piece that had made her famous when she played it at age 10 for the International Young Musicians Competition. "Professor Williams," Amy whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "isn't that piece really, really hard?" Elena looked up at her teacher, hoping he would see the panic in her eyes and change his mind. But he seemed to interpret her expression as normal student anxiety. "Sometimes we must push beyond our comfort zones," he said firmly. "I've been watching Elena's progress, and I believe she has the potential to handle this challenge. It might seem impossible now, but with dedication and practice, she can do it." "But sir," Kevin spoke up, "I've heard that piece before. My sister tried to learn it in her advanced class, and she said it was one of the hardest things she ever attempted." Elena wanted to speak up, to ask for something simpler, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain her reluctance without revealing the truth? An intermediate student should be honored to receive such a challenging assignment, even if they were scared. "I have faith in all of you," Professor Williams said, looking around the room. "Elena, I know this seems overwhelming, but I wouldn't give it to you if I didn't think you could handle it. You've shown steady improvement, and your finger technique is actually quite good for your level." Elena nodded weakly and returned to her seat, clutching the sheet music. Her classmates looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. She could hear their whispered conversations. "Poor Elena," someone said quietly. "She's going to have to practice day and night." "I don't know if I could handle that pressure," another student murmured as class continued. Elena barely heard a word. Her mind was racing with the impossible situation she now faced. She stared at the music in her hands, seeing every note, every phrase, every subtle dynamic marking. She knew this piece so well she could play it in her sleep, but that was exactly the problem. After class, Amy approached her with a concerned expression. "Elena, are you okay? You look really pale." "I'm just nervous," Elena replied, which was completely true, just not for the reasons Amy thought. "Listen," Amy said, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know this seems impossible, but Professor Williams wouldn't give you something he didn't think you could do. Maybe we could practice together sometimes? I mean, I can't help with the technical stuff, but maybe having someone there would make it less scary." Elena felt tears threatening to form in her eyes. Amy's kindness was overwhelming, especially when Elena was essentially lying to her every day. "That's really sweet of you," Elena said. "I might take you up on that." That evening, Elena sat in the empty practice room, staring at the sheet music spread across the piano. She had been there for an hour, but she hadn't played a single note. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How was class today, Mia?" Elena stared at the message, not knowing how to respond. How could she explain that she had been given the one piece that might expose everything she had been hiding? How could she tell her mother that her carefully constructed new life was about to crumble? She finally typed back, "Challenging day. Got my final assignment." Her mother's response came quickly. "I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. You always do." Elena set her phone aside and looked at the piano keys. She could play this piece perfectly right now without any practice. She could play it with more emotion and technical skill than most professional pianists. But that would destroy everything she had built here. She thought about her classmates, about Amy's kindness, about Professor Williams' encouraging words. She thought about the simple joy of being treated as an equal, of having friends who liked her for who she was rather than what she could do. Elena placed her fingers on the keys and began to play, but she forced herself to slow down, to make mistakes to play it as an intermediate student might after seeing it for the first time. It felt wrong, like forcing herself to limp when she could run dot as she practiced. She began to realize the true challenge wasn't learning the piece. It was learning how to play it badly enough to maintain her cover while still playing it well. Enough to pass her final exam dot. She had 3 weeks to figure out how to fail successfully, how to be imperfect enough to stay hidden but skilled enough to graduate. 3 weeks to walk the impossible line between her old life and her new one. The practice room suddenly felt very small and very quiet. Elena looked at her reflection in the dark window and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming here. But then she remembered Amy's smile, the way her classmates had accepted her. The peace she had found in being ordinary. She would find a way to make this work. She had to. The 3 weeks had passed like a blur of sleepless nights and careful practice sessions. Elena had spent countless hours in the practice rooms, perfecting the art of playing imperfectly. She had studied every mistake an intermediate student might make, every technical limitation they would face, every place where the music might trip them up. Now, as she stood outside the concert hall on the morning of the final performances, Elena felt like she might throw up. Her hands were shaking, not from nerves about playing, but from the weight of the deception she was about to pull off in front of an audience. The concert hall was already buzzing with activity. Students were arriving with their families, professors were setting up chairs, and the piano technician was making final adjustments to the beautiful Steinway grand piano that sat center stage. Elena had performed on pianos like this in some of the most prestigious venues in the world, but today, it felt like a mountain she had to climb. "Elena," Amy called out, hurrying over with a bright smile. "You look so nervous. Are you okay?" Elena managed a weak smile. "Just the usual pre-performance jitters, I guess." "You're going to do great," Amy said, giving her a quick hug. "I've heard you practicing, and you've improved so much. Professor Williams is going to be so proud." If only she knew, Elena thought to herself. Amy had indeed heard her practicing, but only the carefully imperfect version Elena had crafted. The real practice sessions happened late at night when the building was empty, when Elena could play the piece as it was meant to be played, just to remind herself what she was giving up. Elena's parents had wanted to come to the performance, but she had convinced them to stay home. She couldn't risk anyone recognizing her, and she especially couldn't handle seeing the confusion and disappointment in their eyes when they heard her play so far below her abilities. The concert hall was filling up now. Elena found a seat in the back row, as far from the stage as possible. She watched as families found their seats, professors chatted with colleagues, and her fellow students paced nervously in the wings. Everyone looked excited and nervous in the normal way people do before a recital. Professor Williams stepped onto the stage and tested the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our semester-end piano recital. Today you'll hear performances from our intermediate piano class, and I couldn't be more proud of how hard these students have worked." Elena's stomach twisted. She thought about all the real work her classmates had put in, the genuine struggles they had overcome, the honest progress they had made. Here she was, about to perform an elaborate lie. The performances began. Kevin went first, playing a batch invention that had challenged him all semester. Elena could hear the places where he had struggled and the places where he had triumphed. His playing wasn't perfect, but it was honest and full of effort. The audience applauded warmly, and Elena saw his family beaming with pride. Amy was next. Her Mozart piece started nervously, but as she settled into the familiar melodies, her confidence grew. There was one moment where she stumbled slightly, but she recovered gracefully and finished strong. Elena found herself genuinely moved by her friend's performance. This was what music was supposed to be about: personal growth, overcoming challenges, finding joy in the process. One by one, Elena's classmates performed. Each had their own story, their own struggles, their own small victories. Some played better than expected, others fought through obvious difficulties, but all of them were being authentically themselves. Then Professor Williams called her name. "Our next performer is Elena Rodriguez, who will be playing one of the more challenging pieces on today's program, Chopin's Minute Waltz." This piece requires not only technical skill but also musical maturity, and I'm excited to hear how Elena has grown as a musician this semester." Elena's legs felt like jelly as she walked down the aisle toward the stage. She could hear whispers from the audience. Some people recognized how difficult this piece was and were curious to see how the quiet student would handle it. As she climbed the steps to the stage, Elena caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. In the very back of the concert hall, partially hidden behind a pillar, stood a woman with silver hair and an elegant black dress, Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, her former teacher and mentor, the woman who had guided her through her early career. Elena's heart raced. How had Dr. Hartman found her? Why was she here? Elena tried to catch her eye, but the older woman was looking down at her program, seemingly unaware of the panic she had caused. Elena reached the piano bench and sat down, her hands trembling slightly. She adjusted the bench height, a habit from her performing days, then remembered she was supposed to be nervous about technical things, not comfort details. She looked out at the audience and saw Professor Williams giving her an encouraging nod. Amy was sitting in the third row, making encouraging gestures. Her classmates were watching with supportive expressions, probably worried about how she would handle such a difficult piece. Elena placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. She had practiced this moment hundreds of times. She knew exactly how to play it with just enough skill to pass, but with enough imperfection to maintain her cover as an intermediate student. She began to play. The opening notes came out exactly as she had practiced, slightly hesitant, technically adequate but not brilliant. She could feel the audience settling in, probably thinking they were about to witness a brave attempt that might not quite succeed. Elena continued with her carefully crafted performance. She played the familiar passages with the studied imperfection she had perfected, adding tiny hesitations where a less experienced player might need to think about the next phrase. Her timing was good but not exceptional. Her dynamics were appropriate, but not inspired. For the first minute, everything went according to plan. The audience seemed impressed that she was managing such a difficult piece at all. Professor Williams was nodding approvingly. Amy was smiling encouragingly from her seat, but then Elena's eyes found Dr. Hartman again. The older woman was now looking directly at her, and Elena could see recognition dawning in her eyes. Dr. Hartman leaned forward slightly, her expression changing from casual interest to focused attention. Elena's concentration wavered for just a moment. Her fingers, operating on muscle memory built over years of professional performance, began to play a phrase with just a touch more elegance than she had intended. It was barely noticeable, but Dr. Hartman's eyes widened slightly. Elena quickly corrected herself, returning to her practiced imperfection, but she could feel sweat beading on her forehead. She was walking a tightrope, trying to balance between success and exposure, between honesty and deception. The piece continued, and Elena found herself caught between two worlds, the world where she was Elena Rodriguez, struggling intermediate student, and the world where she was the child prodigy who had once made this same piece sing with impossible beauty. As she approached the final section, Elena realized she was about to make a choice that would change everything. She could finish as planned, maintain her cover, and continue her ordinary life. Or she could let the music speak its truth, regardless of the consequences. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment longer than necessary, and in that pause, Elena made her decision. Elena's fingers remained poised over the keys, that split second of hesitation feeling like an eternity. The concert hall was completely silent, waiting for her to continue. In that moment, she could feel the weight of every choice she had made over the past few months pressing down on her shoulders. She glanced once more at Dr. Hartman, who was now leaning forward in her seat, her experienced eyes studying Elena's every movement. There was something in her former teacher's expression. Not anger or disappointment, but a deep sadness mixed with understanding. It was the look of someone who had lost something precious and had finally found it. Again, Elena's heart pounded as she realized there was no going back. The careful facade she had built was crumbling, and she had to make a choice that would change everything. She could continue with her planned performance, finish as the struggling intermediate student everyone believed her to be, and hoped Dr. Hartman would keep her secret, or she could let the music speak the truth that had been buried inside her for so long. As her fingers found the keys again, something extraordinary happened. The notes that came out were different from what she had practiced. They weren't the carefully imperfect sounds she had rehearsed for weeks. Instead, they were pure, crystalline, and filled with an emotion she had forgotten she possessed. The transformation was gradual at first. Elena's fingers began to move with a fluidity that seemed to surprise even her. The hesitant, studied quality of her playing melted away, replaced by something that sounded natural and effortless. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing that something was changing. Amy, sitting in the third row, blinked in confusion. The Elena she knew, the one who had struggled with simple scales just months ago, was playing with a confidence and skill that seemed impossible. But there was no denying what her ears were telling her. Professor Williams sat up straighter, his eyes widening as he recognized the level of musicianship he was hearing. This wasn't just improvement, this was mastery, the kind of playing that took years of intensive training to achieve. His mind raced, trying to understand what he was witnessing. Elena's playing continued to evolve, each phrase more beautiful than the last. Her technique, no longer constrained by the need to appear amateur, blossomed into something spectacular. The difficult passages that would challenge even advanced students flowed from her fingers like water, each note perfectly placed and filled with meaning. Students throughout the audience began pulling out their phones, instinctively knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The piece that had seemed like an impossible challenge for an intermediate student was being performed with the skill of a concert pianist. Kevin, who had performed earlier, leaned over to whisper to a friend, "Is this the same Elena we've been in class with?" "This is incredible." The music filled the concert hall with a richness and depth that seemed to touch everyone present. Elena's interpretation of the piece revealed layers of emotion and complexity that most people had never heard before. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was telling a story, painting pictures with sound, making the piano sing in ways that seemed almost magical. Dr. Hartman watched with tears streaming down her face. She recognized not just the technical skill but the musical soul she had helped nurture years ago. This was her former student, the brilliant young woman who had disappeared from the classical music world, leaving behind only questions and worried colleagues. As Elena entered the final section of the piece, her playing reached new heights of expression. Her fingers danced across the keys with impossible speed and precision, but it never felt rushed or mechanical. Every note had purpose, every phrase had meaning. She was no longer Elena Rodriguez, the struggling intermediate student. She was Elena Santos Rodriguez, the child prodigy who had once moved audiences to tears in the world's greatest concert halls. The audience was completely silent now, mesmerized by what they were hearing. Some people had tears in their eyes, others sat with their mouths open in amazement. Even those who didn't know much about classical music could tell they were experiencing something special. Elena felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in years. All the pressure to hide, to diminish herself, to pretend to be less than she was, it all fell away. For these few minutes, she was completely herself, using the gift she had been given to its fullest extent. As the piece built toward its climax, Elena's playing became even more intense. The technical passages that had once made her famous were executed with breathtaking precision, but now they were infused with a maturity and emotional depth that came from her experiences over the past few months. She had learned what it meant to struggle, to be ordinary, to value relationships over achievements. All of that understanding poured into her performance. The final notes approached, and Elena played them with a delicacy and power that seemed to make the entire concert hall hold its breath. When the last sound faded away, the silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on its feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the building. The applause wasn't just appreciation. It was recognition that they had witnessed something truly exceptional. Elena sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. She had done it. She had let her true self emerge, and there was no taking it back. Every person in that room now knew that she was not who she had claimed to be. Professor Williams stood up from his seat, his face a mixture of amazement and confusion. He began walking toward the stage, his mind still trying to process what he had just heard. Behind him, Amy was staring at Elena with wide eyes, her understanding of her friend completely shattered and rebuilt in the space of a few minutes. Dr. Hartman was already moving through the crowd, making her way toward the stage with tears still flowing down her cheeks. She had been searching for Elena for months, and now she had found her in the most unexpected place. Revealing herself in the most beautiful way possible, Elena finally stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the audience. The applause continued, but she could see the questions in people's eyes. She could see Amy's confusion, Professor Williams' amazement, and the knowing recognition in Dr. Hartman's face. As she walked to the front of the stage to bow, Elena realized that her life had just changed forever. The secret she had guarded so carefully was out, and she would have to face the consequences. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The girl who had come to Westfield Academy to hide was gone. In her place stood a young woman, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had finally found the courage to be herself. The applause continued for what felt like forever as Elena stood on the stage, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She had never felt so exposed, yet somehow so free at the same time. The secret she had carried for months was finally out, and there was no going back. As the clapping gradually died down, Elena could see Dr. Hartman making her way through the crowd toward the stage. Her former teacher's face was streaked with tears, but she was smiling, the kind of smile that comes from relief and joy mixed together. Dr. Hartman climbed the steps to the stage, her elegant heels clicking against the wood. When she reached Elena, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around her former student in a warm embrace that spoke of months of worry and searching. "Elena Santos Rodriguez," Dr. Hartman said softly, using Elena's full name for the first time in months. "My dear child, I've been looking everywhere for you," the audience gasped. Some people started whispering, and Elena could hear phones buzzing as people began searching the name online. Within moments, photos and videos from Elena's childhood performances were being shared throughout the concert hall. Amy sat in her seat, completely stunned. Her mouth was open as she stared at her friend, the girl she had tried to help with. Basic piano techniques, the girl she had worried about when she got such a difficult assignment. "Elena Santos Rodriguez," she whispered to herself, recognizing the name from classical music documentaries she had watched. Professor Williams approached the stage, his face showing a mixture of emotions. He looked embarrassed, amazed, and slightly hurt all at once. When he reached Elena and Dr. Hartman, he stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. I don't understand," he finally managed. "Elena, you've been in my intermediate class for months. You struggled with basic scales. How is this possible?" Elena took a deep breath, knowing she owed him an explanation. "Professor Williams, I'm so sorry for deceiving you. I never meant to make you feel foolish or waste your time." "You were hiding," Dr. Hartman said gently, her arms still around Elena's shoulders. "You were trying to escape, weren't you?" Elena nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I was so tired. Tired of the pressure. Tired of always having to be perfect. Tired of never being allowed to just be a normal person. I wanted to know what it felt like to be ordinary." The audience was listening intently now, drawn into this unexpected drama unfolding before them. Students who had been Elena's classmates were recording everything, trying to process the fact that they had been sitting next to a world-famous pianist for months without knowing it. Professor Williams ran his hand through his hair, looking confused. "But why did you let me assign you such a difficult piece? You could have told me you weren't ready for it." Elena smiled sadly. "Because you were trying to challenge me, to help me grow. You saw potential in someone you thought was just a regular student, and you believed in me. That meant more to me than you'll ever know." "You were protecting yourself," Professor Williams said, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "And I forced you into the spotlight you were trying to avoid." finally found the courage to approach the stage. She climbed the steps slowly, her face full of confusion and hurt. Elena, I tried to help you with basic techniques. I felt sorry for you when you got this assignment. I thought you might fail. Elena turned to her friend, seeing the pain in Amy's eyes. This was the moment she had dreaded most, having to face the people who had genuinely cared about her while she was lying to them. Amy, your friendship meant everything to me, Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. For the first time in my life, someone liked me for who I was, not what I could do. You were kind to me when you thought I was struggling. You offered to help me practice. You made me feel normal. But I wasn't helping at all, Amy said, tears starting to flow. I was probably insulting you every time I tried to show you something. Elena shook her head quickly. No, you were teaching me something much more important than piano technique. You were teaching me about friendship, about kindness, about what it means to care about someone without expecting anything in return. Dr. Hartman stepped forward, addressing the crowd that had gathered around the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena Santos Rodriguez disappeared from the classical music world 2 years ago. She was one of the most promising young pianists of her generation, but the pressure became too much. We've all been worried about her. I needed to find out who I was without the piano defining me, Elena explained to the crowd. I wanted to know if people could like me when I wasn't performing miracles. I wanted to experience failure, struggle, ordinary friendships, all the things I missed when I was growing up in concert halls. Kevin, who had performed earlier, called out from the audience. So you were pretending to be bad at piano this whole time? Elena laughed, wiping tears from her eyes. It was actually harder than you might think. Do you know how difficult it is to play badly on purpose? I had to study all the mistakes that beginning students make and practice them until they felt natural. Professor Williams shook his head in amazement. All those times I corrected your technique, tried to help you improve. You were still teaching me, Elena said earnestly. You were showing me patience, encouragement, and belief in human potential. You treated me like I mattered, even when you thought I was just an average student. That's a kind of teaching that goes far beyond music. Dr. Hartman smiled at this exchange. Elena, I think your time here has changed you. The way you played today, it had all your technical skill, but there was something new. Something deeper, Elena nodded. These past months taught me what music really means. When I watched Amy struggle with her Mozart piece, when I saw Kevin work so hard on his batch invention, I remembered why we play music in the first place. It's not about being perfect. It's about expressing something real. The crowd around the stage had grown larger, with students from other classes and even some faculty members joining to hear this extraordinary story. Someone in the back called out, "What happens now? Are you going back to performing professionally?" Elena looked around at all the faces staring at her, some curious, some supportive, some still confused. She saw Amy wiping her eyes, Professor Williams looking thoughtful, and Dr. Hartman waiting patiently for her answer. I don't know, Elena said honestly. For the first time in my life, I get to choose what comes next. Maybe I'll perform again. Someday, but it will be because I want to, not because everyone expects me to. She turned to Amy. And I hope I can keep the friendships I've made here. They're more precious to me than any standing ovation I've ever received. Amy smiled through her tears and nodded. Of course. Though I might need some time to process the fact that I was trying to teach piano to someone who's performed at Carnegie Hall, Elena laughed, and for the first time all day it felt completely natural. Well, you taught me something much more valuable than piano technique. You taught me how to be a friend. As the crowd began to disperse and people started sharing videos of Elena's performance online, she realized her story was just beginning. She had learned to be ordinary, and now she had to figure out how to be extraordinary in a new way, on her own terms. The girl who had hidden at Westfield Academy was gone, but the woman who emerged had found something worth more than fame. She had found herself.